There's always something to do in this city. Whether you're just visiting or you call Portland your hometown, I found something that everyone needs to check out. Portland walking tours. Let's go talk to the storyteller himself, Gary Corbin. All right, Gary, it's raining out right now.
Doesn't stop us. We run our tours rain or shine.
Great, well let's go on this tour. What are you gonna show me today?
Oh, we have a lot of things to show you about Portland today.
Gary, what is Portland Walking Tours?
Portland Walking Tours is a local company here in Portland consisting of resident experts on Portland's fascinating culture and history, ranging from its colorful characters, past and present, and its great current culture, food, beer, wine, and very colorful characters.
How can we find more information about Portland Walking Tours?
www.portlandwalkingtours.com.
Gary, tell me a little bit about the Best of Portland tour.
The Best of Portland tour is the flagship tour and the one that got us going. It's about the great things about Portland that make people fascinated about it and want to come visit or even live here. It's about the culture, it's about sustainability and livability, it's about our local food scene, it's about the architecture, and the great stuff you find just walking around, these quirky, weird things that you see, and what's the story behind that? And that's what our guides will tell you.
And what's the Underground Portland tour all about?
The Underground Portland tour is what I call the worst of Portland. It's the seedy underbelly of Portland, the underworld stories, the so-called Shanghai tunnels and all the myths and legends surrounding that, the crime scene that has beset our past. Portland was not always the cosmopolitan, happy city that we are today.
I think this one might be my favorite, but tell me a little bit more about the Beyond Bazaar tour.
Oh, the ghost hunting tour. Yeah, that's a great, fun tour. That's where we take people down into some of the spooky, haunted places of Portland. There is some great research done on many of Portland's really old buildings, some of the saloons and hotels. The murders and mayhem that went on at these places often led to haunting stories. And we take people down with real ghost hunting equipment and let them do some hands-on exploration to see if they can find the ghosts.
So, Gary, why do people think Portland is so haunted?
Well, Portland was a pretty seedy, nasty place back in the late 19th century. It was a Wild West town. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of crime and just seedy goings-on. People who die under inauspicious circumstances tend to want to have their story told because their story has been incomplete, so they hang around to try to communicate to those who are left behind.
So what else are we going to find on the Bazaar tour?
We go to a number of different haunted sites like this one where there's some tale of misdeeds and goings-on that did not end well for someone, and the spirit is trying to communicate. We use these devices on the tour, electromagnetic fields, to see if we can pick up any evidence of a disturbance in our environment that might indicate the presence of something supernatural.
All right, Gary, I've got to get out from underneath here, but I need to know what else I am going to expect on the Bazaar tour.
Well, we're going to tell you all the spooky stories around Portland and show you some things where just very untoward things happened. It's not only the spooky, but just the bizarre. Things like the 24-hour Church of Elvis, where you can worship at the throne of the king. Or Voodoo Donuts, where you can eat donuts made of just about anything. We try to capture all the wacky stuff about Portland.
Keep Portland weird, huh?
Very.
My mouth is watering. Tell me about the Chocolate Decadence tour.
It's exactly what the name implies. You go on that tour and you will indulge in chocolate. You will experience chocolate in all of its forms, from bean to bar, as we like to say. You'll see the nibs that came from the actual cocoa bean. You'll see a whole cocoa bean, and we'll take you through to all the steps in the process and allow you to taste it all along the way. You'll drink chocolate, you'll nibble on chocolate, you'll get it in baked goods, you'll get it in potentially some ice cream, you'll get it even in some condiments.
What's the Epicurean excursion all about?
Epicurean excursion is about Portland's local foodie scene. If you're really into food and all of the flavors and complexities and textures of food, you'll love the Epicurean excursion. We focus on that tour on the fresh, local, organic, seasonal, sustainable foods of the so-called slow food movement and how Portland's food scene has really exploded in the last few decades.
I know Portland has the best drinking water, but why do we run drinking fountains year-round, and what's a Benson bubbler?
Portland's amazing water is one of the reasons we have such terrific beer and coffee here in Portland. And that's why we have these bubblers all around town. Local millionaire and philanthropist Simon Benson donated $10,000 to the city in 1912 to construct these bubblers. Simon Benson would not appreciate the beer and wine culture that we have today. He was a teetotaler, and he noticed that after he let his guys off for lunch, they would come back to work a little less productive in the afternoon. His workers were going into town to get lunch, and the only place you could go was a saloon. They wouldn't sell you a glass of water. They would only sell you a glass of whiskey or beer. So he donated $11,000 to the city to construct 20 of these Benson bubblers. And so they were put all around town. Today we have dozens more replicas, but you can see which ones are the originals because you can see the nameplate on them that says 1912.
Gary, did Shanghaiing really exist here in Portland, and what does it even mean?
Shanghaiing did happen in Portland. Portland was a major port city with a lot of ship traffic in and out who needed crew. It was called crimping in the day rather than Shanghaiing. We now call it Shanghaiing because of the exotic places that people would be shipped off to. It was a practice that was widely tolerated, actually, in the day, and if not legal, at least winked at. Men would be forced into servitude against their will. Sometimes they would be knocked out, sometimes they would be drugged, other times they would just be tricked into signing contracts that they didn't know how to read or didn't bother to read, and suddenly find themselves in the hold of a ship as a 6-month indentured laborer. Well, the tunnels run all through the city, but they've been shut off. You cannot access them. We'll show you what remains of the Shanghai tunnels.
So right now I am underground in one of the Portland Underground tunnels.
Well, you're in one of the access points to the tunnel with what remains of the so-called Shanghai tunnels. A lot of murders and things like that are said to have happened in those tunnels and in the basements of hotels and restaurants like Kelsey, for example, and Mamma Mia's restaurant where that stands today.
When can we go on the bazaar tour?
The bazaar tour is every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings at 7 and 10. The 7 is family friendly, the 10, adults only.
Can we play Scrabble on the tour?
No, these tiles are left out so that the spirits, if they're so inclined, can leave us a message.
Ah!
Gary, what's this plaque from 1894 all about?
Portland is subject to what is known as the 50-year floods. We have a 50-year flood cycle. The Willamette River, that flows into the Columbia River just a few miles from here, collects water from snowmelts, rainfall year-round, and every spring that water level rises. In 1894, we had our most severe flood, and that's the one that reached this level. City streets for blocks and blocks were flooded, basements were flooded, buildings were destroyed by this major flood. The tunnels were constructed in part to help relieve the floodwaters. The buildings that had tunnels for drainage tended to survive the floods better than those that did not. You'll see a few iron buildings around here in Old Town, but only a few. We used to have almost 300. Today we have only about 30. Iron buildings don't do so well in such a wet climate, especially when their foundations are rusted out from below by floods.
Okay, Gary, is this like an old jail cell?
A lot of people would like to make you believe that, but actually what this was for was when basements would flood, they would need to have these airways to run through so the basements didn't just basically grow mold and stink.
Hello? No one in there. Why do we even have tunnels in Portland?
The tunnels were put in for very practical reasons, like flood control and running utilities all through the city. and sometimes for moving goods and people.
Does Portland really have more strip clubs than any other city?
We probably have the greatest variety of strip clubs in the country. We have crazy things like a karaoke strip club at Devil's Point. We have a vegan strip club where they serve no meat and you can wear no leather at Casa Diablo. And we even have cross-dressing strip clubs like Darcelle's. The reason that we have so many strip clubs is stripping is considered protected speech under Oregon's Constitution. It's a form of political expression. If you want to take off your clothes to express your opinion to the president, we empower you to do so. It is not against the law to be naked in public in Portland.
Every city has a Chinatown, but in Portland, I hear of Old Chinatown, New Chinatown. Where is our Chinatown?
Well, the old Chinatown, or the official Chinatown, has some great things about it, like the gate that greets you into Chinatown. A larger gate, by the way, than San Francisco's. You'll see this fantastic Hung Far Low sign that's been there for decades and decades. And you'll see the red lampposts and some Chinese lettering. In the last census, however, we discovered that the number of people living in Chinatown that were actually of Chinese descent was 0. Chinatown has basically moved from Old Town over to the new Chinatown on 82nd Avenue, which is lined with fabulous Chinese restaurants, many of which used to be here in Old Town.
Gary, I want to hear about the Erickson Saloon.
Erickson's was famous for having the longest bar of any saloon in the country. It was over 300 feet, and the block itself is only 200 feet, so you can imagine how did they do this. It was a wraparound sort of bar. It wasn't one big, long strip of wood. Erickson's only allowed men, as most saloons of the day did. Women were not allowed, except at Erickson's they could go in to dance. So back in its day, Erickson was used primarily for alcohol consumption and dance. And today, however, it's used for alcohol consumption and dance.
Gary, was the Skidmore Fountain really filled with beer?
It was a great offer that unfortunately the city turned down. The Skidmore Fountain was a fabulous gift to the city from Mr. Skidmore, who had traveled to Europe and wanted to donate something wonderful to his home city. And so he donated $5,000 to the city to erect this fountain. Unfortunately, it cost $18,000. So city leaders had to chip in to foot the bill for the difference. Henry Weinhard offered to fill it with beer on the day it was unveiled, and the city thought, maybe not such a good idea. Figure fire hoses running from Weinhard's brewery down to the fountain might get attacked by people wanting to siphon off some of the free beer, so they turned him down.
Gary, thanks for having us today. And if you want to find out more about Portland Walking Tours, go to portlandwalkingtours.com.